The Charavale Mall opened back in 1982, when my parents were bratty teens like their parents before them, and tonight it would be open for the first time since it closed in 2012. I park the van and look around the barren parking lot that seemed to stretch on for miles. With the lot to myself, I could have parked closer to the mall entrance, but I wanted to take some time to enjoy the ambient lot, and besides, I wasn't really in a huge rush to finish this job. Aside from shopping here in years past, I never really took a moment to question why exactly this place fell into such disarray, aside from the obvious loss in anchor tenants and decrease in traffic. I adjusted my optical visor and attached it to the dashboard-mounted network. The dashboard hummed to life, and the sky-blue light of my visor's browser came into focus. After a while, the old Windows startup logo rang in my headphones. On the left side of my seat, a keyboard swung up and around in front of me, and my seat elevated back slightly. After I logged in, the mouseless optical reticle was calibrated, and soon my eyes moved across the screen, highlighting what I gazed upon. I opened up the dossier I had on Charavale, which outlined the deed, the title, all the relevant information from its opening to its inevitable foreclosure. And just as I thought, after decades of declining sales and empty retail spaces, Charavale was foreclosed upon. People had their suspicions that the mall might be in trouble once Sears left, leaving the large two-story mall with only 3 anchor stores left. I remember walking through Sears once or twice back then. Other than clothes, I really had no reason to go to Sears. And even JCPenney and Macy's was a better selection in prices. There was just something about Sears that made their clothes appear cheap. Maybe it was the fact that just a floor above the clothes I could find some appliances and power tools, and the fact that I could just go and get so many different products at the same store made the selections feel less valued or rushed. Of course, even with a great selection, that doesn't really mean anything. 2 years after Sears left, JCPenney moved out and Charavale was left without another vital anchor to keep the lights on in the place. By 2010, the mall was hanging on by a thread with Macy's as well as its last anchor. And after Macy's left in 2012, the mall was officially in free fall. Out of the 103 retail spaces in the mall, it was just up to the 4 biggest to keep this place afloat. The biggest shame out of all of this was that really no point did the mall have a prime. From what I could really read from the reports, there was always some retail spaces available in the mall, and at most there were only 85 out of the possible 103. Impressive, if you'd ask me, but most of them were either revolving door stores or niche shops that would sell obscure knickknacks and trinkets, while the remaining shops were just, up-and-coming small businesses from the local area. Of course, this really isn't the kind of town that has vibrant and unique, worthwhile ideas. At one point or another, I remember at least 4 different spray paint t-shirt stands, and I believe 3 different turquoise jewelry shops. I logged off and powered down my console. I opened up the back of the van and suited up for a long night. The first of many, I assumed. The city had asked me to do a thorough investigation of Charavale before the new owners began their remodel. I found it strange that I was being sent in alone over a 2-story mall of this size. I would then find out that there were 2 other inspectors, and they would also have their reports during the days, which left me at the nights in the graveyard shift. Lucky me. My thoughts were interrupted by a jarring chirp of a security van that rolled up alongside me. I squinted as the rotating blue and red scanned over me and my van. An officer exited the vehicle, and he let out a tired grunt as he did. Evening. I'm with the Rockin' Department of Public Safety and Infrastructure, I announced as he shut the door behind him. I couldn't make out a lot of details about his face because of the lights, but his badge number was clear as day. The holographic coating that coated the yellow shield and the blue numbers were clear to view. 496EB7703. I make a quick note of this, and with my optical network camera, I searched the number against the RPD roster. Sure enough, he came up. Officer Dan Birch. 9 years with the force, and a spotless record. It's a rarity these days. How's it going? The officer said as he approached the van. He kills the lights and takes out a mag light and shines it at my van, giving my jumpsuit a quick scan. Clearance badge, please. He extended his stubby hand. I reached into my lapel and showed him my laminated Rockin' DPSI badge. He took a look at it and held it up to his face, no doubt scanning it with the barcode of his government-issued prosthetic eyes. The officer handed back my badge. Sorry about that. You've had some hoodlums trying to pass off as you. Yeah, they haven't perfectly replicated the authentication codes in your badges yet, he said with a light chuckle. I remember last year having at least 3 badges because of those barcodes being compromised. Why, that sure was really a mess. And it's a good thing that cell of hackers was taken care of. I know us DPSI boys aren't really, have a lot of clearance for important things, but we can easily get into the back end of most utilities and most residential homes. It's scary to have that kind of bunch of B&Es happen with my codes, eh? Dan sighed, and I leaned against his cruiser. Yeah, I remember. A tough nut to crack with that one. But one of the detectives found that these hackers were using a past employee's code that hasn't been deleted from the system yet. And bastards were using a dead man's ID to break into his house after 2 months. He even got the man's widow, too. The depravity of some people, you know. His name was, Sergei Moros, right? I met him a few times. I really only know him from work. I thought back to Sergei. He was a salty codger, tough as nails, but always helped when he could. He worked in sewage inspection, I believe. Well, I won't keep you. I got a watch on this side of the mall. We've had a few squatters try and set up camp here, Dan said. I logged out of my browser and nodded. He got back in his cruiser and drove off. The flashing lights of his cruiser shot out like beacons until he turned the corner to the other parking lot. I went back to the rest of my stuff for tonight. I loaded up the mall's blueprints to my visor, and I grabbed the surveillance drones. 3 softball-sized orbs that, when activated, hovered above my perimeter and scanned up and down to hard-to-reach places. I synced the 3 drones and tucked their camera feeds into a minimized browser tab. Without a direct command, they just kept circling overhead about 3 feet above my head. The only sounds were my boots crunching against the loose gravel and the quiet whispering whirls of the drones as they circled overhead. The faint blue light they gave off, blinking occasionally, felt very surreal. Even after a decade of these things being at my disposal, I never really got over how otherworldly they were. I ran a preliminary test to see if they were all functioning normally. 3 clicks, followed by 3 chirps. All systems were a go on my end. It took 3 good pulls to finally open the door. Without the hydraulic door assist, it weighed about 60 pounds on rusted hinges. The second pair of doors only took a couple, and I entered what was once Macy's. I had my drones expand their search radius to about 10 feet and turned on their lights. The blue LED flashlights whirled around me, staying on any objects of interest before moving on to the next one. Nothing of use was in this space, however. When the Macy's anchor left, they took everything that wasn't nailed down, which included the racks, the rugs, and everything from the glass jewelry cases, and then some. Stale air lingered around me, prompting me to slide over my filtered mask. And no doubt with the months of rain, and there's bound to be some mold. I click over to one of the drones and take manual control. I see through its lens and having its venture off. My left eye keeping track of that, while my right eye looked ahead. Now, this would normally be an impossible task and require, at the very least, a minimap of the drone feed while the majority of my visor was on my own eyes. But thanks to the latest package of upgrades, I took the split brain augment. My left and right brain are now separate entities, which allows me for simultaneous viewing, info processing, and coordination. The other 2 drones were covering my flank and rear while I had the manual drone look up closer at the ceiling to inspect all the mold and moisture. My free eye darted down when I saw a black mass connected to the tiled floor. I shine my light and see a glint of the original gold trim that separated the floor tiles from the dark green carpet. I should have removed all the carpet when they moved out, I said to myself. I approach and have my drone do a sanitary scan of the section. Looking closer, dismissing my manual drone feed for a moment, I noticed that the patch is roughly 3x4 and roughly torn out from one side opposite the trim. Was it left behind by the cleanup crew? Likely after checking the date for the last cleanup crew, which was back in 2012. The drone showed a reading of low-hazard mold, various stains of unknown origins, and water. I isolated the stain readings and had the drone do an advanced scan, singling out any trace elements. Still nothing until the very last readout suggested that there were faint traces of iron and hemoglobin. Blood? I scratched my chin. I ran a scan again just to be sure, and the results come back the same. Perhaps someone from the crew back then got a very nasty cut, removing carpet from this place and all the glass, and that shit sure is likely. The first drone returned, and I began to catalog its readouts for mold and mildew. Just as I had thought. High levels of mold and mildew, which is to be expected. I checked the maintenance logs. Even when this mall was open, the mildew and moisture situation was handled very poorly. I recorded the levels down in my report and switched the first drone back to its orbit. I checked back to the second drone I let out and saw that it had already gotten to the main foyer outside the Macy's mall entrance. I recalled it back and made my way to the first level of Macy's. I looked at the faded concrete outlines where the counters used to be. The LED lights reflected off the mirrored pillar, displaying a warped and distorted view and cascading the blue light off its rusted and soaped surface. I moved closer, and with my gloved hand I remove a fragment of mirror, and it crumbles and shatters like sheet ice on the marble tile. I rub my hand against the crumbling plaster and metal column. For its position, it's not likely a load-bearing column, at least I hope so, with the amount of wear and tear on it, just beneath this thin, frail layer. I make a note of it and continue on my way to the Macy's mall entrance. The entrance led through 3 massive concrete arches with a polished marble floor lined with brass, which sloped into a small ramp upwards towards the grand foyer. While the whole ramp was evenly elevated, 2 assistant ramps were made on either side that led into a resting area in front of some storefronts. From the list of stores in the dossier, there used to be a Zales on the left and a fur company of some kind on the right. My footsteps echoed through the foyer, my flashlight dancing around the dust particles. High above me were 2 large metal fans, and judging by their fins and numerous blades, they were far from functional, but that only made me think of why would you bother to install them. They had to be close to 70 feet in the air. Before me was a long, out-of-order elevator shaft. I shone my light up into the shattered glass shaft and saw it, and stopped at the second level. Long vines encircle and weave out of the inner and broken and spider-webbed surface, and leading to the top. Rain hit the floor far off towards the alcove under the second-floor walkway into the main level. I think to myself, no, that's not rain, but it was water. My boots sloshed into a puddle to the side of the elevator. I look up to see a growing and dripping stain on the bottom of the second-floor walkway. Odd how it would be dripping when there's no water pipes that lead under this. Then I heard another small trickle further down the walkway, splashing near the floor below, and that's when it hit me. I walked briskly back to the foyer. I made a high-priority note in my log and sent it off right away. If what I think is happening is in fact happening, an exposed area of the ceiling near there must be letting out a ton of water. I'll go back towards Macy's and turn my light towards the elevator and shine my light to the second level. And sure enough, there I saw it. A patch of moonlight sky with a bright beam shooting down into what I believe to be the food court escalator. I'm sure these investors would love to hear the news that they will essentially need to replace this entire section of floor and reboard the support structures as well as patch the hole in the ceiling. I begin to make my way towards the left corridor and down towards the Bergner's anchor wing. I keep my drones close by, noting and cataloging any hazards along the way. I must admit, aside from the water issue in the second floor, the mall was, for lack of a better term, intact from the copious amounts of loose debris, trash, and faded signs. I begin with the left side of the corridor and make my way down the rental spaces, looking at any notable damages, missing pipes, copper wiring. Without any outstanding markings, signs, or shelves, all of these rental spaces looked exactly the same, more or less. After 3 or 4 stores, it just became mechanical. Mold, faulty wiring, missing copper pipes, substandard ventilation. It went on and on and on. I scrolled through the blueprints of this mall, wondering, how could people even function in a place that relied so much on recycled air? I would normally find this in an old office building with double-digit floors, but even with such a large area, the amount of access to fresh air was way below code. Of course, I just resigned myself and thinking, just finishing the job and making its place. This place had its chance. Soon, I approached the food court. This wide-open plaza gave way to a checkered floor of salmon pink and speckled turquoise, lined with gray cracks, the kind of horrible clash of color that would only exist into early 80s and 90s. The court had an oblong blob shape with a carousel of restaurants and stops along the way, with generic pictures of food outlined in dim and long broken neon signs. I shined my light down at the end and noticed the bend where the escalator would take people up to the second level. I walked along the outer ring of the food court, looking inwards to the sea of dusty chairs and tables, laminated speckled surfaces or funky spirals rolled into the field of vision. The funky splashes of neon pink and seafoam green clashed with my sense of color and time. It's as if a god's eye formed in the uniform of sea of metal and polished wood. It paralyzed me, forcing me to gaze deeper into the void of swirling dust that kicked up by more and more of my mere presence. The sound of running water snapped me back to reality when I was met with a glow of moonlight. I pointed my light down and taken aback by what I saw next. In the small alcove of the escalator, half broken and rotted away by time and disrepair, was a vibrant and lush microjungle of mall ivy and plants. Fed by the constant sun and water, the vines stretched up towards and out of the gaping hole left in the ceiling. I called one of my drones to survey the area and have another one take some pictures. I look around the base of the biome to see the extent of the damage. I can only imagine what this looks like in heavy rainfall. It must look like a real waterfall when it rains, cascading down a rainbow mist and everything looking like the cover of an old Natty G. I saw the exposed gears and belts of the long dead escalator, and to look closer into just how intertwined the two were, I carefully removed one of the panels and had the last drone shine its light down the shaft to the leading platform. I was met with a mess of roots and tangles that leaked from the plants. I saw the marble base where the mall plants had been originally potted and began to sprout over the lip of the base and crawled outward. I shined my own light to see a light patch of moss growing on the rubber belt rail. After over 20 years, these docile shrubs and decorations were making a dent into the escalator. Perhaps with another 20 years, the tree would take root. Tree taking root. I laughed to myself at the thought of bringing someone from Parks Department to take a nature survey of the world's smallest ecosystem. I called back my drones and we walked back, this time continuing the guided path of the food court. I looked at some of the vacant food places this time. I tried to recall what exactly was there. I passed by the first one and recognized the white polished tiles at once. As Quencher's Smoothies, a cozy little time capsule that seemed frozen even in the time that the mall was open. I recalled the solid lettering in the black and white from the menu and the generic assortment of fruits and other smoothies on their menu. I remembered pictures were being very faded, as if they were already 10 years old even back then. The smoothies and shakes were great, phenomenal even, but the same price you could get a burger at Burger King. And in my mind, a drink should always cost less than a meal, even if the drink was, yogurt, soft serve, fruit, and or veggies in it. The stand next to it used to be a McDonald's for the longest time. Without checking the logs, I could tell it had been there, when the mall opened at least, but years later it was replaced by a Burger King. It's all the same, really. Both places were laid out the same. When Burger King moved in, nothing really moved except for the logo. I smiled to myself and looked back at the hours me and my mall rat friends wasted arguing about which was better. You see, I was of the opinion that Mickey D's had the better fries and chicken sandwiches, while my friends would argue that the burgers from Burger King were far superior. Back and forth would go on and on about this mall would close, greasy wrappers littering our table while we discussed what, at the time, was a matter of most important to 16 to 25-year-old brains, which often included such pivotal gems like who would win in a fight between Superman and Goku, or which Sailor Scout would you go out with As if any of our pimply, sweaty faces would woo any fictional Japanese magical girls. And having one of those, quote, back in the day moments. The empty void carrying it clear across the food court. As I make my way out, cataloging the condition of these rental spaces and the overall condition of the court. My mind kept going back to those days, here and there. I turned back before leaving the court and walked back into the sea of tables and chairs. I found it strange that they were all still out and left amongst untouched this whole time. A thick layer of dust showed that no one would have moved them recently, and judging by that, it was safe to assume they hadn't even moved in nearly 20 years. For the first time since I stepped in, I felt like an outsider disturbing a long-forgotten tomb. The notion may sound ridiculous considering, I've been in much older buildings and inspected houses built from before I was born. I was no stranger to this place, right? I walked this path before when I was young. Hell, when I was a young adult. I bought burgers and fries from the Mickey D's and pizza from Sbarro's. I was not a stranger. All that changed was my age, right? I felt a tightness in my chest and swallowed a hard knot in my throat. The dust must be getting to me. I made my way back through the main corridor. While I may have aged, I'm me. Even though the cells in my skin and my body had long died and grew anew, my hair grew, then fell out, my height, my weight, everything about me from those years had changed, yet I could still say that I was me. This place had not changed, and I could not say it had changed me. The next space to the right of the food court had always hosted a hot topic, the host of perpetual teenage angst to the bitter end. Passing by, I could almost hear the My Chemical Romance and Attack tracks blaring in a dimly lit space where kids always felt like they were born in the wrong generation. Well, not because they were lost, but because they were cynical. I would roll my eyes at this store in my older youth, and while I matured and grew, they kept playing the music I had listened to in high school. Feelings. Not properly processed feelings, but just very basic concept of feelings was a revolutionary idea back then. I cracked a smile at the thoughts that were going on for nearly every teenager's head back then. While Hot Topic was the staple of Charavale, the next space was an ever-changing mess. What started was a Zoomies that became a Sam Goody, and then a Club Libby Lou. 3 different demographics in the course of over 20 years, from skater boys to record junkies, and finally a place for princess-pampered little girls. In the final years, it turned into a store I could be proud of to be of regular. Otakopolis. Harold Darrow, the owner of Otakopolis, graduated with me. He was a tall, sickly stranger with a tuft of brown curly hair that ran down his back in the years following his graduation. I gotta say, there was not enough conditioner in the world to tame the beastly Judaism that lied within those curls. But other than that, I almost knew nothing about him, really. Well, that was until I became a regular at the shop that he opened at the mall. It was a hole-in-the-wall kind of hobby shop where people could get retro and vintage anime movies along with collections and other memorabilia. I would spend weekends and afternoon here when I could. Over the years, Harold would expand his business into the world of Magic the Gathering and comics before moving out of the mall. While tenants and merchants came and went, Harold miraculously stayed longer than some of the national chains. But in the end, he left it just the same. The last I heard, he still ran the shop with his son in downtown Belvedere. I visited when I could, but lately, something just hadn't clicked with me. I stepped inside to check it out, surprised to find the carpeting still intact. I looked further down the elongated rental space to see the shelving units were still there too. It would seem that Harold could only afford to really move his merchandise, and left nearly everything else behind. I could almost picture the layout of the old shop. Up front, Harold would greet you behind the counter while he shifted through the latest expansion of Magic, picking out any value cards and putting them behind the glass cast. Down a little further were comics, which Harold had meticulously sorted out for Marvel, DC, and everything else. In the middle row, there used to be racks of manga that were sorted alphabetically. I never really liked how Harold only kept the latest issues in stock. I mean, I understood that he needed to, but I was never really a fan of the softcore porn some of the newer series would advertise. Even as I got older, some of these issues kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Besides, my focus was on the very back of the store, where on one side of the wall would contain what was affectionately called the bulk bin of magic cards. Here is where I would spend entire weekends sifting through rares and cards Harold couldn't even put behind the case at just 50 cents a pop. The cards were sorted out in cardboard segmented boxes and put on racks, each box probably containing about 3,000 cards. And there were about 10 boxes in all together. The boxes may have left, but the shelving remained, just holding dust at this point. I scanned the back of the store and marked down any structural notes. As I turn to leave, my eye catches something tucked away in one of the shelves. I shined my light to see a faded beige box with a glint of black. Upon closer inspection, I was almost in disbelief of what I found. Nestled in the old dusty wooden shelves was an old 1998 Virtual Resort. I brushed my thumb against the side panel to reveal a light pink Virtual Resort logo. A palm tree acted as the T in Virtual Resort. I felt along the old plastic, small creaks and clips echoing in the store. Along on the other side of the box, I felt the various knobs and buttons. The whole thing was about the size of a pair of binoculars. I felt the coarse black elastic that connected the power supply. A set of wires connecting back into the headset. I give the elastic a tiny stretch and hear the tired old fabric groan and stretch out. Flakes of dust and shredded elastic leak through the mesh and float in the air as the stretched out piece of fabric did not constrict back. I was left holding the console now with a band that had been doubled in size. I headed back to the counter and placed the Virtual Resort down and examined the back of the case and the power supply. My memory was correct. This thing ran on a lithium rechargeable battery. Shit, I muttered under my breath, so I looked at the charging port to see that it was not a standard USB or any common port used today. Electronics back then had a specially designed port so customers would only get replacement parts straight from the Virtual Resorts. Fortunately, I had a solution in my pack. I opened it up and began to rummage around for a replacement power source. I took it to a drowned docking station, a small black platform with a USB port for a fast and convenient recharge. Now all I needed to do was remove the casing to see what I was dealing with. Sure enough, time would make this battery useless to me. In the back of my mind, I imagined this would have bothered me if I was an avid collector, and no doubt Harold would be kicking himself to death for letting something like this go to his old store. On the right market, this thing could fetch for about $4,000 easily. I mean, of course, I had just broken the original strap, and the battery was either fried or beyond repair, so maybe $1,000, since the scripts and copies of the actual programs existed online. But having it all in the original casing just made it valuable. After all, it's all about the aesthetic. After some well-placed snips and electrical tape, I am able to connect the Virtual Resort console to the drone docking station. A dull red light blinked on the left side of the headset, showing that it was charging. I leaned against the counter and watched over my creation, hoping it would work well enough to power the device. I brought up my display again and put my drones on autopilot to survey the last store, Bergner's. Out of the 3 anchors Charavale had left, even at my age, I had no interest in going in Bergner's, even if it was my job. The drones would suffice. No one in charge of this project would even look at my reports unless there was a severe warning or structural failing. This mall closed decades ago, and even back then, nothing was really wrong with it structurally. For there to be a severe structural failing now, this building would have had to withstand monsoons every day for a year, and even then it was not likely. I lifted some dust from the counter with a sigh. What was I even doing here? The drones could do everything I could. I was told, the human element can't be replaced. that my 30 years of professional experience cannot be programmed, and that there were calls that machines just couldn't make. And sure, that might have flown back in the first info boom, but now I'm not so sure. These 3 drones, the ones that come lock, stock, and barrel from Silicon, came back with centuries of experience each. They could have their codes updated in milliseconds. Their scans were 99.87% accurate and could cover more ground in a night than I could in a week. So, why even have me at all? I'll tell you why. Because despite these titans of industry that could fit in the palm of my hand, they were like newborn babies. Drop them from the waist height and they're dead. Submerge them in water and they'll short circuit. At least, these models probably would. I would laugh it off if it wasn't so dismal. The only thing keeping me out of unemployment was the fact of playing babysitter to my replacement. My focus was drawn to the blinking red light, and a smile crawled upon the corners of my mouth. The tech before me was much more manageable, capable of doing great things while at the mercy of human input. I was brought back to the virtual resort when the blinking red light shows a bright green. I carefully remove it from the charger and feel over the knobs and dials on the left side. My fingers graze a divot on the side of the console, which called me back to another failing, the cartridges. The virtual resort ran on programs through cartridges similar to that of a Game Boy. They were pretty compact and ran everything from AOL to Zork, but alas, I had no cartridges. Of course, I could still enjoy the preloaded programs, which included a game of pinball and a full tutorial of Virtual Resort. I could even go to Palm Springs, as it's the only preloaded destination. I dug out some of the remaining grime and dust from the knobs and slipped the console over my eyes. There were no headphones, but it came with a standard audio jack which my normal earbuds would suffice. I feel the warm hum of the fans, dust and webs blasting out of the vents, a jerking, buzzing fan flipping to life as the system went through a cold startup. The lights flickered on, dust particles and grime on the interior lenses. I squint at the sudden intake of light as the backlit screen came to life. The words Virtual Resort flashed on the screen in a hot pink and neon, the palm tree T in yellow and green neon. The image disappeared before it took to a boot-up screen. I decided to log out of my own visor so that the 2 HUDs didn't interfere. There was a small pop in my earbuds as the audio came online.
Initializing startup sequence.
A female voice started.
Loading. 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 All systems are go. Please enjoy your stay.
The screen goes white before the rest of the mall comes into focus. The view I had was not perfect. It was clear I was watching my world through an LED screen. I looked around to see that I was surprised to see the refresh rate was responsive, albeit a noticeable lag of about half a second. A window popped up as a warning stating that the system was unable to locate a cartridge. I stared at it for the OK button on the window for about a minute before realizing I had to manually click it. I fumbled with the dials on the either side of the console until my fingers found the mouse buttons. A white icon hovered at the center of my screen and clicked OK. Well, the button stuck a bit. The rest of the menu opened up to me and I took out a look through the properties folder to see if it was a registered device. Since it did not require a password or username, I was led to believe that this was a new model, but lo and behold, I found a name. Jack Bauer. Jack Bauer. I snorted out a laugh at the obvious alias and continued to look through the personal files. Notes, homework assignments. Apparently Mr. Bauer was in high school, judging from the algebra homework and history notes, and judging by the amount of red highlighted sections on the report of the Berlin Wall, not a very good one. I closed out the documents, the mouse button sticking still as I closed each one. I brought up my own visor, the 2 HUDs causing a slight forced perspective effect that took a little bit to work to ignore. I check on the drone's progress and see that they are done with Bergners and headed back to my location. I put in the coordinates for the next couple of locations along with the way back to buy some time, an old bookstore, a laundromat, and a corner drugstore. It should give me about 30 minutes of playtime. I leaned against the counter, the tired metal frame groaning under my weight as I fiddled with more settings and files. I booted up a game of pinball next. The window popped up and the pixelated pinball game came into view. The game started out just as well, only a slight delay with the age of the hardware. However, the stickiness of the mouse buttons began to wear on me. There would be a full second before the button was usable again, and before I knew it, I had lost all my pinballs. With a sigh, I exited out of the game and loaded up the virtual resort destinations. Without any cartridges, I could only go to Palm Springs, where the virtual resort headquarters was located. I scrolled through the tours and scenes that I could access and decided to go to a hotel poolside would be a fun start. I clicked on it, and the fans and disc began to start humming louder. The audio pops in my earbuds, and suddenly the screen goes black. The virtual resort logo fades into the screen, followed by a few lines of code at the bottom left corner, initializing the program. I lifted the console off my eyes for a second to get my bearings and see a small concrete island that would have housed some mall plants. I feel the aches and slight tingling in my knees and hips and started walking out of the store, my charger and other tools crammed into my pack. I sat down on the island and slid the console back over my eyes, just in time for the Palm Springs location. I found myself in the pool area of some hotel. I looked down to see the water wash over my feet. The feedback in my earbuds replicated the water lapping against the side of the pool adequately. The occasional clipping of static and the distortion kind of breaks the illusion, but for the late 90s, this was about peak of perfection. The ambient noises of quiet oceanside resorts began to load in as seagulls began to call and caw. I run my hand along sides to feel the cool concrete of the mall on the other side. My hands bumping over a crack in the cement, I looked down at my hand to see that the pebbled-covered poolside. My hand sank just below the surface. The smooth, cool concrete does not really fit well with the uneven rendered surface. I saw the tips of my fingertips dip past some of the more pronounced pieces of cobble. The water phases over my legs, but where my legs enter, there is no displacement, further breaking the illusion that I'm actually at a pool. To accurately recreate the feeling of a beach or pool, some people set up rigs of fog, mist, and vapor machines to recreate the salty air of the sea or chlorinated taste of water. I remember reading about these rigs people would recreate in their virtual resorts, more immersive treadmills modded into high-definition audio systems. Some people would even modify entire rooms to fit this getaway experience. These rooms were dubbed by many as virtual plazas. I never knew anybody rich enough to afford to make a virtual plaza, but I have seen many walkthrough videos and read about them in countless forum posts. In some way, I removed myself from the original experience by about 3 degrees of separation. I was living in those plazas. By reading those posts, letting the words on the screen sink in, I put myself in a room that I have never been in, experienced technology that was all around me but was just out of reach, and to go to a world that was just a plane ticket away, but could experience in an instant. I cracked a small smile at the absurdity of it all. To go to such great lengths to have, control over our technology, but where did it all go? I got a notification on my visor that the drones have completed their scan of the building. I dismissed it and hear the hum of the drone circling overhead, like needy children wanting to go home. I brought up the command prompts for the virtual console to exit out. The entire scene froze for a moment without closing the program. I tried to exit again. It's still nothing. I then hear in my ears the same voice again.
This system has encountered an error and must shut down. We are sorry for the inconvenience.
Shit. System crash. I rolled my eyes and brute force a shutdown of the system. I held down the power button and wait for a beep and the whole system to shut down. I'd be more concerned if I'd actually had any unsaved data or any other apps running, but losing the demo location was unlikely. Besides, with the tools I had at home, I could fix this thing up like new. Polish the console, blow out some years and years of dusts. Honestly, if I kept the casing and the original decal intact, I could bring this thing into the 22nd century. The software was open source at this point, or could be obtained easily through some file-sharing sites, and the new strap would be easy to come by. Yes, this could work. Piece by piece, I could improve upon the virtual plazas of yesterdecade and surpass this small electric company's wildest dreams that they had hoped for this product. I got up and brought up my visor. Running through all the checks and notes the drones went through, the virtual console tucked under my arm, I signed off on all the drone's reports and sent them to the office, where another AI would approve them and then be sent to the client, who would most likely have another AI to handle it. Looking through the whole correspondence, it was likely that I was the only actual human that in this whole operation, from the supervisor to the chair of the zoning board to the clients in the city too big for the landmass it was founded on. This building was coming down. All traces of its existence will be wiped clean, and in its place, a new, shiny beacon of progress and forward thinking will take root, to be abandoned in another 20 or 30 years when I'm just too old to live. I looked down at the virtual resort, a simple toy by today's standards, but was at its peak back in the time, long forgotten and only remembered through shared memories and nostalgia. I brought it up to eye level as I walked, my footsteps echoing through the empty foyer as we rounded the corner to the back of Macy's, the plastic lenses looking back at me as I looked back at it. Did I get this for the monetary value? I mean, sure, it would fetch a pretty penny, even in this state. I feel the buttons on the side and smile. This little thing had the capability to take me anywhere theoretically, and it was mine. Under my control. What I had now was just so simple, it just made me laugh a bit. The drones above me buzzed lightly and lazily at my level, the whirling and buzzing slower and more lethargic. It was running low. I tucked the virtual resort under my arm and held out my hand and let the drone lazily plop in my hand, sputtering itself off. It gave off a few seconds of warmth, shutting down completely, almost like the purr of a small kitten. I shook my head and cracked a smile as the other two buzzed over me. We made our way back to the mall and witnessed a faint band of blue over the horizon. The sun would be rising soon, and it was time to get to work. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed the first in the Charavale series. This is my own original short story. A lot of time and effort went into actually writing this. So, yeah. If you liked this video, please share it around. I would really like for more people to see my work. I really enjoy the feedback I get on these stories. Big thanks to the Discord Writers Lounge for helping me look over this story. A bunch of my other writer friends, you know who you are. And expect the next one. If you want to see more, please subscribe to the channel. Share, comment. I'm still making these outros. I don't know exactly what I'm doing.